So, good morning, everybody, and warmly welcome to this HR Tech seminar, wherever you sit in the Nordics or actually out in Europe somewhere. It's 8:16 and we're ready to get started. My name is Louise Dyrendal and I'm very happy to be with you here today. I lead the workforce advisory practice in the Nordics and together with my colleagues Andreas and Eva, we will run this seminar. We did select a slightly provoking title for the seminar, not to imply that HR tech typically fails, rather that it's hard to implement technology, which has basically every single employee in any company as its target audience. And this seminar is for all of you that are on all stages of an HR tech journey. It may be that you're still on a premise, you might be going into an HR cloud journey, you might have completed that and are thinking about doing optimization. You might be doing robotics process automation in your transaction shared service centers. You might be thinking about a service enabling tool. All of you are warmly welcome because this seminar is for you guys. Okay, next slide, please. So I will do a short introduction followed by a snapshot of the newly released research around the science behind successful transformations. So super interesting research. Then we will get to the heart of why tech, with HR tech being at the center here, is so hard to implement. Why are technology-enabled transformations so challenging? Obviously, then we also want to talk about what can be done to turn the ship around and save a sinking HR technology implementation and bring it up to speed again, or take the next leap forward in an optimization journey. We will finish with a wrap up and then finish also with questions and answer session. So please post any questions that you might have in the chat and we'll bring them up towards the end of the call. So all in all, a good 45 minutes up until the top of the hour. So next slide, please. So when I say we here, I mean the workforce and wider people advisory practice at EY. And the purpose of this slide is a bit to clarify who we are, since I know that there are people still out there that believe that EY does audit, and that's perfectly correct. However, in addition to audit, which is just 1/3 of our business today, we do a variety of things where we have clients with tax issues, transaction issues, consulting issues, and more specifically today, the people advisory components and issues. So on the slide here, we have a global people advisory practice present in 130 countries, 2,000 corporate clients that we support basically since long, 35 professionals that have the skills that we need in order to provide these services. In the Nordics, we're about 325 employees across the Nordic countries. We do have, and I think this is an important point, because we also always want to be at the best for our clients. We want to bring the best to the people out there that we serve. So we have a dedicated center of excellence for digital HR, which look at thought leadership and develop both industry and capability insights to be at the forefront of whatever we do. And also they sometimes support us in the most complex and strategic projects that we have throughout the globe. So you might have been in touch with them already through us in the Nordic local practice, or you will be at some point. Moving clockwise down, our people advisory service offerings, just for the fact point of it, consist of culture and leadership, change and learning, HR transactions and rewards, organization and workforce transformation, and then finally, which is the topic of the day now, the HR technology and transformation area. With me today, I have two lovely presenters. I have Eva Tominen, who is a partner out of the Finnish practice and also leads our workforce advisory practice in Finland. And then also Andreas Billmy, who is our HR technology lead and expert in the Nordics, and also responsible for some of our major alliances. Good. Then let's move over to the next slide. So we see some major trends around cost pressure and also new ways of working coming up. And this is leading to a new need of thinking about how we can optimize the use of the money we spend in HR technology. We have the invasion of Ukraine, also a recession basically coming up or around the corner potentially. We have the coronavirus, which is both a threat and an opportunity with hybrid ways of working. And then last but not least, inflation. And those of you that saw the Swedish newspapers tomorrow, inflation is slightly cut down, but the core inflation behind it is increasing faster than ever. So it's still a major threat to our businesses. And this is also why myself and my colleagues throughout the Nordics see an increased relevance and interest in optimizing existing HR technology system and actually squeeze out the maximum of them. So this webinar is for all of you out there looking to get better value for money of your existing technology. And I should say also those of you that want to have a better people experience and be at the forefront of digital HR. I will tell you a small anecdote. I was working with a client 2 years ago who was still on premise with SAP HR for that sake. And he said, you know, because the private consumerism is moving into the corporate world with expectations. So he said, I can sit at home in the weekend and I can book a trip to Thailand through my mobile with travel, logistics, hotels, transportation, everything. And then I go back to work on Monday morning and I don't even know, I cannot even see who I have as employees in my organization. So I think that in a nutshell is around the people experience, actually being transparent and open and showing what's out there in terms of data and giving the managers what they want. Moving on to the next slide then. So now we will move into the first topic, and this is just a small snapshot of the science behind successful transformations. Moving on next then. So EY has recently launched a super interesting research together with Oxford Said Business School around what human factors drive success or failure in any transformation. And I think particularly for the audience coming here, those of you that have basically HR at heart, this is particularly interesting, and also you know how to manage this, putting humans at center. So in a nutshell, there were 3 components that this survey singled out. One is that leaders and employees alike undergo emotional journeys throughout a transformation. So that's a fact. Secondly, there are 6 levers in managing those transformational journeys and emotional journeys, I should say, which combined dramatically increase the chances for success. So keeping eyes on those 6 levers and managing those and managing the emotions around them increases success rate dramatically. Thirdly, and finally, not only that, with better control over the emotional journeys, we see new ways of driving sustained organizational performance and also being ready for the next transformation with confidence and trust in the company we work at. So all of this combined means that organizations that do put humans at center of the transformations are 2.6 times more likely to be successful than those who don't. That was a small snapshot of the research. There's heap loads of more information, and it's almost as it's a separate seminar around that. And now we will move into the heart of the matter. So next slide, please. And this is where we'll forward to hand over to my colleague, Andreas, why technology-enabled transformations are so challenging. What do we say there, Andreas?
Right. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you also for dialing in so early in the morning, most of you. So if we can move to the next slide, please. There's some interesting things to point out here on this slide, and in particular with the backdrop of what Louise just mentioned. So on one hand, we have big socioeconomic factors impacting the work that we do today. And we also have the sort of science behind and the knowledge that transformations are very difficult, and very often they come into difficulties, very often because they don't put humans at the center. But if we look into this slide specifically, there are some interesting additional facts here. And one of the things that we are seeing is that most large or medium-sized organizations will spend more than they've done before on HR technology. And as I said, that's both for sort of medium-sized businesses, but also the sort of large blue chip organizations. They want to spend more on HR technology. But at the same time, we still see ongoing that transformations fail to deliver the expected outcomes. Challenging to deliver the project on time, challenges to find the sort of the get to the project goals and the desired outcomes, but of course also challenges to achieve the project on time and budget. And I think even more alarmingly, that after all this money being spent and all these resources and efforts going into transformations, 50% of employees that we surveyed around our clients still find the technology being implemented being very difficult to use. So I think on one hand, we're seeing an increase and a desire to increase the spend on technology, but equally we still see those sort of ongoing challenges around adoption, change management, transformation, and reaching the desired outcomes. So I think those two things are really interesting to point out. So I think if we go to the next slide, please. I'll hand over to Eva, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the dimensions here.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, we tried to summarize for you some of the sort of basic challenges that we see in many HR technology transformations. And if you fail in one or some of these foundational steps, you kind of maybe will have a successful go live with your system, but these 4 foundational topics will come back and haunt you for a long time and impact the experience value of your new solution. If we go through all of them, firstly, you need to get the basics right on the design of the foundational items. So really the kind of structures, data models, authorizations, integrations, and so forth. And this is really a particularly big risk if you start with a smaller pilot group first, and then you do too much of the design just for that pilot group, and then you try to expand to the whole organization. So getting the basics right is really the first thing. And then secondly, you really seriously need to keep the employees and particularly the manager's experience in the center of your design. I've found out that or noticed that many of the implementations really start with this design principle that we are doing this for the managers, and it's not for HR, it's for the employees, it's for the managers. But then in the actual design workshops and in the testing phase, it's mainly just HR representatives who show up or are invited. So that's really, you know, something to keep in mind, that it's not enough to have it in your design principles. You really need to take the employees and particularly, I would say, the line managers along on the journey. Then thirdly, you have to make sure that you have a clear governance model both during and after the implementation. And that requires alignment between the different HR teams, HR IT team, IT teams, different sort of business groups and different other stakeholders. Otherwise, you will not be able to get the needed timely decisions. And this is particularly the case if you aim to really transform some of the processes and not just lift and shift the old processes from the old systems to the new system. So governance model. And then lastly, you really cannot underestimate the importance of change management. So what you just heard Luis explaining and presenting on our findings on putting the humans at the center of transformations, this is of course also the case for HR transformation and HR technology implementations. And what I would like to really highlight once more is that you have to make sure that you take the line managers along on the change journey right from the design phase. So it cannot be that the change management only starts at sort of testing or training phase. You really need to keep them in mind, keep them involved, really think about what the outcome will be for the end users, not just for the HR throughout the journey. So Andreas, would you agree or have something to add on these 4?
I do agree, funnily enough, but I think maybe just to exemplify this a little bit further, I think in particular, the sort of getting the digital basics right and the relevance of that, which will sort of enable you to take the next leaps in terms of continued transformation. So I think many organizations are still sort of grappling a little bit around what to do with maybe a Workday transformation or an Oracle or a SuccessFactors transformation. I think getting those basics right will enable you to move forward in the value chain and deliver more of a digital experience and more automation. And I think finally, just one other point to sort of point out around governance. I think this is probably the most difficult one to get right because it involves all those different people that all have great opinions and great ideas around how to run something like this. And I think getting the relationships established between IT and HR and laid it out nice and clear, just to give us point, getting the governance defined, really, really critical. So that's the IT and the HR part, but then there's also the HR to HR part where you have many components that are trying to agree on roadmaps and priorities, the reward team versus the recruitment team versus the learning team, etc. Getting all those parts together in an orchestrated manner, in a collaborative manner that's still clear and defined is really, really critical going forward. So those are just two additional sort of sound bites from me on that point.
And I'm sure, at least I hope that the audience, if you have some other thoughts or experiences on what else you think are really the sort of foundational things to keep in mind, then you can hopefully add them in the chat, and we'll have some moderate and share this with you as well.
Great. So I think we can move forward to the next slide, please. So this will then be after having talked about all these issues and problems, now let's turn this into something a bit more positive and forward-looking. So I think we can move forward. From our perspective and sort of from our experience, there's a couple of key things to keep in mind when then to wanting to turn the page or when to want to do something different and really revamp your transformation again. And it all starts with the people at center. Louise mentioned employees. Eva talked passionately about line managers, but of course also your kind of HR consumers are also relevant in this. So what are they expecting in terms of their work, in terms of their engagement, and how they can perform various activities? And what we see is really, really important when you want to take the next step around optimization and to potentially shift gear from the challenges you might be facing today is to look at this holistically. And for us, a holistic perspective would mean that you would have to sort of assess where you are in terms of your foundations and the functionality of the systems you've implemented, the level and understanding of experience and adoption in the organization, of course, critical to build a better understanding. There's many aspects around the technical components and the systems themselves. Have you implemented according to leading practice? Have you followed releases? Have you done the right things to get the most out of your assets? I think many organizations are still grappling with some of the insights and the data and analytics that can potentially come out of all these fantastic tools and systems. And many of them are actually bought on the premise that we can now get access to my employees in a location, just to Louise's point earlier in the presentation. And then thirdly, the aspects around the commercial, the governance, and the strategic alignment, they're of course incredibly important to move something forward. So because without those three components with you, it's very difficult to take the next step. So what we have and what we sort of like to propose in a situation where you're looking at optimization is to focus on a bit of an as-is or current state assessment of where things are, because getting into the details around that is really important. So it becomes a bit more fact-based. What is actually working? What is not working? The second step would be around the vision. We see many organizations and that might have done a vision or a strategy for HR technology a couple of years back, very often aligned with potentially their first kind of cloud or SaaS implementation, but the businesses have shifted, and so does the HR technology and transformation strategy going forward. The third thing I would want to point out is to, again, with humans at the center and your employees and your consumers at the heart, is to actually get going and moving in that direction. So whatever you do in terms of actions or next steps or trying to mobilize and improve things would be around really focusing on things that will make a difference for your end users and prioritize potentially that before you prioritize other things going forward. And the fourth thing is then to sort of reach more of a consensus around an HR technology roadmap that would really articulate and handshake what the next 3 to 5 years might look like. So there is an agreement between those various components in the governance that we talked about. So this is a way of getting to grips with optimization. Here are some key parts of that we see are really, really critical to understand that journey ahead. And yeah, Eva, anything to add there, Louise?
No, I think it was a good summary.
Excellent. Then we can move forward, I think, to the next slide, then, please. So I think we want to kind of round up the slides with some real client examples and some work we've done fairly recently. And just to sort of showcase a little bit of how it can work and some of the key activities involved. So this particular example was a global organization with about 40,000 employees. They had a very interesting mixture of both sort of office-based workers, but also a heavy manufacturing, blue-collar type environment. The client in question had implemented several modules of SuccessFactors and also put in place their sort of EC core HCM solution. But we were approached because there were a number of existing pain points that made life quite difficult. So one of them was the sort of misaligned digital HR strategy. So on one hand, the IT organization was pulling in one direction, and on the other hand, you had an HR organization trying to do something quite separate in some cases. And that sort of gap that opened up between the IT and HR organization was a little bit based on on an unclear governance between HR and IT. So who actually made the decisions and who actually had the money, who actually had the resources to focus their efforts in one way or the other. The third aspect was around user experience. There was a lot of sort of heavy and fairly negative feedback coming in from line managers and employees that whatever's been implemented didn't work very well. People didn't quite understand what was going on, and therefore adoption was suboptimal on many levels. And I think the fourth major obstacle was that there was a number of legacy HR systems, predominantly around payroll and timekeeping, that was such a heavy drag for further innovation that it sort of kept the whole organization, the whole focus was on trying to fix those issues. So that was a bit about the background. And what we did alongside the client is we set out the project that had two distinct phases. So the first phase was really around diagnostics, and something I pointed out in the previous slide, that we spent about 8 weeks or so looking at a maturity assessment and assessing this client's capabilities and execution of HR processes, of their change management, of their data and their governance, and all the components that sort of sit outside or supports the system implementation from that perspective. We also did a very interesting piece of research around user experience. So we ran a number of sort of outside-in type activities, voice of customer. We had some workshops and some surveys to really give a more of a data-driven approach to what were people actually thinking and what were they actually experiencing trying to use this technology and going through this transformation. And finally, we also did quite quite extensive work on evaluating the implementations that's been going on, and around how had they followed best practice, had they followed and delivered the latest innovations in the cloud technology, etc. And this sort of then first phase of diagnostics then led into some of the things we just spoke about, which is the next phase, and what do we do to move forward? So we spent a lot of time thinking about business design principles going forward. So are we going to put line managers and employees and user experience at the heart? Yes. So that was one of the outcomes that we really talked about, and we kept as a design principle. We also worked extensively with the client to think about organization and governance. So getting all those constituent parts together in various forums, in various working groups, and really getting a more methodical way of thinking about the governance going forward. We did, of course, also come up with a technology end state and a roadmap. So turning those challenges into opportunities and handshaking and agreeing what the next 3 to 5 years would look like. And then finally, I think the final 2 key points here, one would be around change management, and something that we had unearthed through the diagnostics phase was that the change management had been a sort of stop-start activity, heavy focus on change management during the projects, but once the projects were done, change management sort of stopped altogether, which of course left a huge gap when they implemented new technology going forward, or new modules, or switched on new functionality. And finally, we also sort of helped with a bit of financial modeling and calculations around what would the cost or the potential cost be for a more future-oriented roadmap. So all in all, there was about 20 weeks of work, first phase on diagnostics, and the second phase really around how to turn the ship around and how to agree and handshake on a strategy and roadmap going forward. Eva, over to you, because I believe you have another interesting client story to share.
Yes, yeah, this is a slightly different version of similar work. So this client, this was also quite a large client, also with blue collar and white collar employees, and they were in different phase of their sort of HR technology transformation journey. So they had already fairly recently implemented new HR solutions, including Workday, ServiceNow, and a few time management solutions for different purposes. However, despite the fact that they kind of had the top of the line solutions already in use, they were still having some challenges, both with end user experience and, most importantly, the overall costs of HR IT and HR support teams were clearly too high. So they asked us to help and do some analysis work for them. We did about a 12-week project with them, and we really helped them to assess the current situation and draw some plans for the future alternative scenarios. So we did a study including kind of similar topics that Andreas just explained there. So we did, for example, quite extensive end user and stakeholder interviews. We analyzed a lot of data, including ticket types and ticket volumes and different kind of other data that they were able to give us. We also carried an extensive time and activity and capability analysis, both for the HR IT team and for the HR support teams, to understand, what kind of capabilities they have, what kind of skills they have, and then where do they spend their time on. So it turned out that some of the process designs that they had were quite complex, which caused not just headaches, particularly for the line managers and hiring managers, but it also caused quite a lot of errors. And quite often the incorrect data ended up all the way to the payroll systems, and then analyzing, backtracking, understanding, and then correcting those errors took quite a lot of time from the support teams. So that was one of the sort of biggest challenges. But it also turned out that the division of work and governance between HR, IT, other teams, and then also vendors was not quite clear, and that caused a lot of confusion and also inefficiencies. So what we did with this client, we then did some benchmarking and then created 3 different kind of scenarios on alternative ways to model and develop their operating model and their organization, and how to change their service delivery model to and how to reorganize the HR, IT, and support teams. But we also came up with quite a large number of improvement suggestions that were then categorized and prioritized. So some of them were quite clearly quick wins, and some were more long-term development opportunities. So similar type of activities, but the client was clearly in a different situation than the example that Andreas just shared. Client was very happy and then decided to do some changes immediately, and I think they are still this was fairly recent work, so they are still in the progress of planning those transformational steps then to improve the current model and the current employee experience as well. And I think I'm pretty quick with my summaries, but I think that really was it.
Okay, so then over to a summary of our conclusions also of what we've talked about today, before we move into a quick questions and answers session. So we did talk about 4 points being fundamental in order to succeed with an HR technology transformation from an HR tech perspective. Getting the digital basics right, whether it's the master data model, topped by the integrations, topped by accessibility and user segmentation, those digital basics is a fundamental of any HR technology. Excuse me. The next thing is key. So the employee experience, and it's experience is everything, which the Apple Steve Jobs really knew about. You could have the Rolls-Royce of HR technology, and we had 2 different cases with absolute Rolls-Royce HCM solutions. However, if people don't experience the solution in a good way, it still doesn't matter, right? The third point, governance, it's about, we talked about reviewing basically elements of the HR operating model and how to take decisions around upcoming releases and around new implementations on top of existing implementations that will help sustain the HR technology and related processes after an implementation. I think what I've struggled personally with most in any implementation is how we together, client and us consultants, cater for continuous improvements. So all those small things happening after the implementation is finally done. And last but not least, change management. We suggest then that, I mean, a good way of doing this is basically the 4 steps that we have in front of us. Assess and evaluate as is. Develop a vision around where you want to be in 3 years' time and align it across the business, not only HR or IT, but also with the business. Develop and explore a number of alternative options of visualizing that vision and alternative ways of getting there, and put those down then in an HR technology roadmap. And that roadmap should also be absolutely clearly and firmly anchored with senior business stakeholders, because whatever we do from an HR perspective, it's for the end users. It's if they don't like it, then I think it won't succeed in the long term anyway. So that summarizes basically the HR technology webinar. We do have a short Q&A, and there's one question basically which have come in, which I think also alludes to the 6 levers we talked about in the very beginning. So in the Human Set Center research, we've seen 6 levers that combined increase chances of success in a transformation with up to 2.6 times in relation to those that don't do. It's quite an extensive research, and those 6 levers are sort of better covered almost in a seminar of itself, obviously. What we can do, obviously, because it's not to be hidden, rather we love to get those out to you, for you to help you wherever you are in your journey. So we suggest to add those as part of the appendix, so you can actually read up on your own. And then also we're happy to be at your service later on if you would want to discuss those levers in depth, because they do require some more insights into how they work. Eva, Andreas, I think this is it for now. Any final words from you before we wrap up the seminar?
No, unfortunately, but I was expecting to get some really tricky questions from the audience, so maybe it's too early for those.
Andreas?
No, nothing to add. Just thank you to those who dialed in at such an early hour. It's much appreciated.
So with that said, then thank you for tuning in, and over and out for this time from us at EY, and looking forward to connect in our next session, upcoming session. Have a lovely day now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.